So, purpose is something we think we all have in common and that orients us. That if each of us really went deep inside and knew our own souls and found a complete alignment so that we were living our authentic purpose, the larger purpose of our world would somehow be served. That there is a larger purpose, even bigger than us, that we somehow align to. And that if we find our way into living on purpose, some greater purpose, greater meaning will be served. Ervin Laszlo pointed out that, in a sense, the utter radical unity of all internal and external experience has purpose and has always had purpose. And if we look at the whole history of evolution, it's miracle after miracle. Brian Swim summarized the whole evolutionary story. If you leave hydrogen and helium alone long enough, eventually they build cathedrals, write symphonies, and put telescopes into orbit and wonder about the meaning of it all. So this is a miraculous process, and it has a kind of directionality. It got more and more articulated, more and more bright and brilliant. It became more and more complex and conscious and cooperative on scale after scale after scale. It is as if existence itself wanted to see itself, to know itself. And we are the ones who are alive right now in the time, it was in our lifetimes, almost all of us, that the first images came to us from that telescope in orbit, where we looked back 13.8 billion years at the beginnings of that process. We are the eyes of evolution, seeing itself with a new granularity for the first time. And part of what we're also seeing through this marvelous moment of scientific accomplishment is a reflection of a process that in some ways seems completely out of control. The International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change back in the 90s created several trajectories. If we continue as we are, there will be this pattern of increase of CO2 and this levels of warming and this level of sea level rise and so forth and so on. And if we mitigate, it could be this much better, but if we really screw up, it could be this much worse. It's been 30 years since the first of those projections, and we are now tracking substantially worse than the worst case scenarios. It's been really hot here. This is August weather. Well, global warming doesn't always show up as warming. It sometimes shows up as weirding. Any weird weather, any destabilization of the stable weather patterns is possible. We actually don't know how that will show up. What we do know is that it will produce more extreme weather events, bigger, more frequent hurricanes, bigger, more frequent droughts, crop failures, killer heat waves, forest fires, wildfires of other kinds, floods. Certain areas of the globe, according to the scientific projections, will become so hot as to be uninhabitable. There'll be even bigger refugee flows. Judging from what we've seen from the refugee flows just from the last few years, that's going to produce profound social pressures and political pressures that so far we haven't coped with our best wisdom. This is also a time, though, when, obviously we need wisdom, right, under these circumstances. We need our best wisdom. And all of mankind's wisdom traditions are in conversation with each other and with the methods and the evidence of science in a way that's also unprecedented. So we are in a moment in which all of our capacity is in the space. And we are having awakenings. How many of us here have had an experience where somehow a veil was removed from your eyes and you saw a new sense of possibility and it thrilled you? How many of us have felt that? How many of you have felt that and had that happen and had it be meaningful in your life more than once already? Yes. And since this history of evolution is a history of miracle after miracle after miracle, we are the ones who know that we're living in a miraculous relationship to this emergent reality. But we have to be able to think in a quite complex way. If we were simplistic and we only could think in black and white either-or terms, we might want to just say, well, the world is complex, it's kind of scary, but I know I have to do something positive, I have to do something related to my own life. I'm going to be positive, I'm going to do the best I can. I don't want to think about all that complexity, either or. I'm going to hope or despair, I'm for hope. Every one of us is a vote for hope. But we have more complex world and more complex sensibilities. We can hold more than two alternatives at the same time. We can chew gum and walk down the street. In fact, we're going to have to do a lot more than that. We are the ones who are alive in a time when, according to the most coherent pessimistic analysis, rooted in ecological science, there's a phenomenon in any ecosystem, say an island or a pond. If there were, say a whole bunch of leaves fell in the pond at a certain point after it had been digested, there would be a lot of organic matter, and you might have a ton of algae would bloom. But if that were more algae than the pond could permanently feed, then there would be this big die-off of algae. So there's this concept of carrying capacity. If you had a stable, permanent population that could always be sustained, that would be the carrying capacity of that pond or island or planet. According to that analysis, we went through a period of crazy exuberance when the European tribes conquered and colonized most of the world. They had amazing riches. They discovered the whole Western Hemisphere. It was as if there were unlimited resources. And on the heels of that period of incredible economic expansion and technological advance, we discovered coal. And the Industrial Revolution gave us another kind of unlimited resource. And then oil and natural gas. And this has meant that we've lived for 500 years in an age of expansion and expansion and expansion based on the actual experience of virtually unlimited resources. According to some analysts, back in about 2007, we had reached the peak of the cheap oil. That was supposedly peak oil. Experts disagree. Maybe we haven't reached it yet. Who knows? I don't have an opinion. But what I do know is that there's been a contraction lately. We all can feel it. Everybody has this, well, as Leonard Cohen put it, has this sorry feeling like their father or their dog just died. There's something off. We're nervous. Some part of us is scared. Well, I think that we are strong enough to face what we fear, to go into the darkness, to let it break our hearts, to be deepened by that process, like the tempering of steel. And on the other side of that process, to emerge with a different kind of happiness and a different kind of hope and a different kind of commitment that is entirely positive. So I'm going to dare to scare you by talking about something that has been in a ghost. I think all of us know that we're living in a destabilized world, and we tend not to talk about it, partly because we're social creatures and we live in a society that is 100% committed to denial. And you can't help, as a member of a society that's committed to denial, as a social creature, you adapt to what's around you. So I'm half the time in denial. I've written a book that's about breaking through denial. I slip into it anyway. You slip into it anyway. It is our consensus trance. I come from a country that elected a man who is the poster boy for all 10 of the 7 deadly sins. Our ability for wisdom to guide our collective decision-making is going to determine the world that our whether we have kids or not, the generations that would have been our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, even children. Some of the projections of the destabilizing forces that are at work are terrifying. Now, I think that we all somehow, the term soul is, I think, a really important term, especially when you're talking about purpose. Very often, they're linked. What is your soul's purpose? And what is the soul? Well, in ancient Greece, right before he drank the hemlock, actually, Socrates told the story of the myth of Ur. Ur was a warrior who had been killed on the battlefield and then brought back to life. And so he told the other ancient Greeks what he had experienced. Well, first he went down to the underworld, and then he went and drank the waters of forgetfulness, lethe. And then he went before the 3 fates. And Lachesis, which means the thrower of lots, assigned him his daimon. Daimon, it's etymologically related to the word demon, but it's not evil, it's just guiding spirit. And that daimon, on the basis of his character from his past life, was assigned to him. And then Clotho, the spinner, gave him his spindle destiny, what we would call heredity and environment. The moment of your birth, your parents' relationship, was it war, was it peace, was it poor, was it rich? What, do you tend to have pimples? Do you have a long neck? All of that. And then Lachesis gave you the magic, the energy, the energetic quality. What do you attract? What do you repel? That was your thrower of lots. We're all lucky. Lachesis did us some good. Then you get Atropos, she who cannot be turned, and she would assign to you the moment of your death. Can't change that. But you can work with everything that Lachesis gave you. On the basis of your character, you got your daimon, and you got your magnetic quality of luck, bad luck, what you attract, what you repel. All of that is malleable. That is what we work with. Well, in that system of understanding, we all consented somehow to be born in this time. This is our time. It's a scary time. If we are in that moment of overshooting our planetary carrying capacity, there might be a quality of collapse. Now, we also know, though, that scientific progress is tending to be exponential. Exponential progress can produce miracles. I think will produce miracles, such that the inevitable awful things that science predicts won't happen exactly like we hear them predicting, because other miracles will be going on. We're going to have disruptions. When a pattern isn't continuing the way you expected, it's disruptive. We talk about disruptive technologies that change an industry. These extreme weather events are disruptions. We're going to have positive and negative disruptions. We're living into a future that is, well, the first thing that we can say is that it's hyper-complex, it's complexifying, it's accelerating. And accelerating is dangerous, because things can't go faster and faster and faster forever. Faster, 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 faster. It implies a time singularity. Something has to change. And we are the ones who are alive at the time when some sort of a tipping point is working. Is it going to be the technological tipping point where we have a super intelligence that can solve all kinds of fundamental problems and bring us to a new utopia? Is it going to be the one where people on purpose come together, wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, link up, sync up, such that the collective purpose of the human collective gets actualized in a way that has never even been imaginable? Maybe we live into that. Maybe we live into a future in which many wonderful and terrible things will create an unimaginable pattern. Maybe it will be just as wonderful and just as terrible as we hope and as we fear. Maybe being with the fact that we don't know, we are recognizing what we've kind of already known. This whole human species. From one perspective, maybe it's in its infancy. But I like to think of it as being kind of a teenager. Humanity thinks it knows. It thinks it's ready to have the car keys whenever it wants. It thinks it can see what's going on. And it's arrogant and immature and irresponsible. And the car doesn't look too good. So it's time for us to grow up into a new human adulthood. And we are the ones that consented, these are the souls that consented to be born in this time. This is our time. You would not be better off if you were born 50 years ago or 100 years ago or whatever, in a different era that didn't have these problems. It had different problems. But this is a very special time, because we're dealing with something that's taking place on an evolutionary scale, not a historical scale. We're talking about the future, not just the future of our grandkids, we're talking about the future grandkids of all the different creatures in the world, many of whom, just a few weeks ago, the last northern white rhino, male northern white rhino died. It's another species gone extinct, but depending on who you hear it from, thousands and thousands are going extinct every day. We're in the midst of the 6th great extinction event in the history of the planet. Jude Dellinger wrote a haunting poem, Hieroglyphic Staircase, with lines that I can't get out of my head because it's about what he couldn't get out of his head. Some of it goes something like, it's 3:23 in the morning and I can't sleep. It's 3:23 in the morning and I keep hearing the voices of my great-great-grandchildren asking me, what did you do when the world was unraveling? What did you do when the oceans were dying? What did you do when the creatures were disappearing? What did you do? Well, one thing I know is I don't want to say, I was paralyzed with fear and grief. Things are far too serious for us to lose our sense of humor and joy. We'd better stay alive and sexy and happening, because things are far too serious for us to lose what's best in us. And we're gathered around finding and locating and activating what is best in us. Every one of us is already doing that. Thank you. And what is best in us is being tested. This is in the evolutionary trajectory of this whole planet. This is a unique moment in which one species has succeeded so well that it has overpopulated the planet. It is now choking on its own wastes. It has depleted the non-renewable resources. It's probably depleted the permanent carrying capacity. What's ahead may be a wonder, and it may be a great hospice project. We may see a reduction of human populations. And how we go through that is determinative of our character. James Hillman, the great Jungian, wrote a book in his 80s called The Force of Character, in which he wondered, he had been a man of purpose and soul, and he's really the grandfather of soul work. And Hillman said, gosh, I've already done my work. He'd written, 25 books. He'd really revolutionized Jungian psychology. He'd done a miraculous series of things, and yet he said, I still feel meaning. There's something going on. Now, part of it was explained by his acorn theory. The acorn theory is that this soul that you were given, this quality by the fates, Lachesis or whoever, is like an acorn that has it within it to become an oak, a peculiar kind of oak, a peculiar shape. And all through your life, no matter how old you are, there is some more full, perfect realization of the unique shape of that oak, of that flower, of that totality of you. So even though he'd already done his life work and he was in his 80s, in some sense, he knew there was something more for him to do. And what was that? Well, he compared it to a piece of fine woodworking. Maybe the piece already existed. But here in his 80s, what was he doing? He was getting out the fine grit sandpaper and the oil, and he was buffing it to a high sheen. He used the word finish. How you finish your lifetime, that expresses your character most fully. Well, I like to face the worst case scenario. That gives me strength. I used to make $3 an hour cash at the end of the day, scraping the lead-based paint off the outsides of Victorians in San Francisco. And with my buddy sitting there on the scaffold, we'd look and say, well, if the earthquake takes place right now, where are we going to jump? We're 30 feet up. Let's think about the worst case. We always felt so much better after we looked at that. It really did something for me. So let's do that for a second. If we passed an awful point of no return last week, and there's nothing we can do to avoid a dystopian future, even one that involves the extinction of the human species. That's the worst case, probably. Will it be possible for me to feel inspired to bring my whole self to life, no matter what? Can I find a no matter what commitment? Well, the way the human species would finish would matter, according to Hillman. There's a total intelligence of the human being that integrates the brain in the head with the brain in the heart and the brain in the gut. There are neurons in every part of the body. Every cell is conscious and alive. The total intelligence of the whole body is absolutely needed, and that would be what I would want to see, like Viktor Frankl wrote about from his experience in the death camps. There were people who were saintly, who would share their last loaves of bread, who would soothe those who were freaked out and suffering, who would be able to be in hell with an open heart and were being love. I want to be that way no matter what. I want a lot of us to be that way. I think, in fact, that we've been given a koan, an impossible question. We can't know the future. It's volatile, unpredictable, hyper-complex, ambiguous. There will be black swan events, completely unpredictable things that will blow our minds, that would never have been possible to predict, and that will take things in new directions. So you can't strategize, you can't plan. You just have to craft of yourself a being who can be in impossible questions and who can, like improv, can just show up in the next new now and the next new now and the next new now with all of what is best in you and with others. Because we can't answer this koan as individuals. This koan is given to us as a collective. We have to become friends of a whole new kind. It's not just a new level of human adulthood. It's a new level of human friendship. It's a kind of love that has more authority than the anger and brutishness that evokes fear. That fear that we can evoke in others can give us power. What about what Teilhard de Chardin had to say about harnessing the energies of love? He said, when we do that, we will have discovered fire for the second time. Well, we are going to be living under the kind of circumstances that require it, and we are built for it. If everything you love is threatened, don't you want to be there? That's what Joanna Macy said to me. If everything I love is threatened, I want to be there. Well, we are here. This is our time. We were born for this. We're built for the trip. We don't know how it's going to go, but we are the ones who were called. We have been given a purpose we can't even see all of. And through our practice, through a life of constantly becoming all of what is potential in us, we are going to be the hands, the feet, the heart of this total human collective, realizing its destiny at a time when everything is on the line. Couldn't be more moral force. Wow, we're lucky. This is exciting. It's scary. It's energizing. It asks something of us we don't even know if we can do. Wow. That's it. That's it. Thank you.